The letter looked like betrayal by candlelight, ink slick and black as tar, the lines a crude map of his heart's divisions. Theon sat in the round tower above the sea, the shutters half open to a world that hissed and heaved, the smell of brine and rot and wet rope. The parchment curled where the damp touched it. Each word took shape as though wrenched out of him with iron tongs. He had written letters before, dutiful boys' reports to Lord Eddard, jesting notes to Robb by the hearth at Winterfell, boasts to noble girls who fancied the wolf's ward. None had weighed like this, like a thrown anvil dragging him toward a depth from which there could be no swimming back. Balon had laughed at him that morning, laughed not like a father but like a lash. Iron-born men with hair salted by spray had smiled with eyes as flat as slit shells, while the Greyjoy banners cracked like the sea's own tongues overhead. The old man's voice had been granite. The Kraken does not kneel. Theon had stood as if braced against a wave, and when it hit him, he had felt it in his bones. You are not of them, or you are, but not in the way you want. Asha's hand had rested on the pommel of her dirk, her mouth crooked in that mocking, almost smile of hers. Victarion's silence had been worse than a slap. Aeron had stared into him the way a priest gauged the measure of a soul. There had been a fire then, not in any brazier, but in Theon's skull. A flare of boyhood vows and long black nights with wolves howling far off, and the smell of pine smoke and frying onions in the kitchens and Robb's easy laugh, breaking the hard northern air. It came as a sudden clarity, like a bell heard through fog. There are things you can live with, and things that will live in you until you are stone. He had felt the shape of stone inside, forming around his ribs. Now the candle guttered. The flame drew long, breathed. Theon breathed, shortened. He dried the sand upon his words with careful pinches, hiss of grit. He read again what he had written. Your Grace. He had called Robb that deliberately, though he had never thought to write it in earnest. Your Grace. It tasted of both oaths and mockery on his tongue. He had written in a clipped, disciplined hand, as if neatness might persuade where loyalty did not. Balon means to strike the north while your levies are away. He will send longships to the stony shore and to Deepwood Moat. He will feint at Torrhen Square to draw out men, then take Winterfell if he can, or failing that, to choke the causeways by the neck while his raiders eat your coasts. He will put Asha at the spearhead. He will expect me to be his catspaw. My lord, I am your man. I swear it by every winter, my bones remembered home. It was too much and not enough. It betrayed his father, his sister, his blood. It paid back his foster home with coins it might despise. He could feel the two halves of him like weights, hung from his collarbones. He was not boy enough to pretend that choosing one would make the other vanish. He folded the parchment. He pressed warm wax and stamped it with the signet he had worn so long it had reshaped the flesh beneath. It felt like sealing a wound and making one at once. When he blew the candle out, smoke threaded his nostrils, bitter and familiar. The stare down coiled around damp stone. The rock sweated. Sea murmured even in the keep's belly, that constant sucking breath that never slept, that made men's minds tide-tossed if they listened too long. Theon moved with the wary tread of a man who knew what it was to be knocked off balance for sport. Outside, the wind gnawed. Torches bowed and guttered in their brackets. In the Ravenry, a boy with scabbed knees slept with his back against a barrow of feed, his head tipped the way a puppeteer leaves a figure at rest, chin sagging, drool shining in the straw. The birds watched with eyes like beads of obsidian caught in nets. Theon lifted a raven that had flown the long run from the Cape of Eagles once and come back. It pecked him, and he took the peck without flinch. Blood dotted his thumb. He tied the message to its leg and murmured over feathers and bone, the way Maester Luwin had murmured to soothe them at Winterfell. Old small sounds, nonsense to men, sense to creatures who knew the air like ink and rode upon it with their wings. He released it. The bird rose messy and suddenly precise, like a spilled thought that found its shape mid-flight. It went into the night beyond the murder hole like a dart. Theon stood breathing in the hum of the place. The straw, the dung, the meat, the oiled hinges of cages, his own iron blood scent in the back of his throat. When the raven was gone and the boy did not wake, and there was no step behind him, it came, not relief, but the heavy know of what he had done. There was no magic to turn him to smoke if the choice went sour. The world would not clap approvingly. It would do what it always did: grind, throw, roll. When he turned from the ravenry, he found her in the shadow of the stair. Asha leaned with her shoulder against the wall, and the torchlight cut her into pieces. Cheekbone, mouth, a line of hair, the knuckles of the hand that did not rest on steel for once. Her eyes had the seas play in them even here. "You smell like wax and bad conscience," she said softly. "You move too quiet, little brother. You've learned that from wolves." "A man learns what the house he lives in teaches," Theon said. His voice was steadier than he had imagined it would be, as if it had practiced without him in some corridor of his skull. "And yet, you write letters to your wolf prince." He did not start. It would have pleased her. "I write to the king in the north," he said. She looked past him at the ravenry door they had both left ajar, black slit with straw-like hair caught in a wound. "I wondered how long before you chose. Father says you were always choosing them, even when you did not know it. He never forgave that he let you go." "Men don't forgive themselves. They put it in other mouths to hear echo back." "I owe Robb my life," Theon said. "More than once. And Father would say you owe him your name." Asha pushed off from the wall and drew close enough that he could see a lacquer of sea salt on her lashes. "This is the part where a good sister takes the letter from you and tuts and tells you to be less of a fool. Let us pretend I am not that sister. I will ask instead, why this? Why now? Why not burn it like a boy's draft and be as iron as all the men want you to be?" "Because I am tired of being only what men call me," he thought. "Because the world does not split cleanly and never did. Because the smell of pine and dogs and the look of Robb's cheek when he laughs make a home in me even here where things rust. Because if the north falls, there will be nothing left that thinks of me and does not spit," he said. "That is honesty at least," Asha said. "I am fond of honesty, as long as it does not mistake itself for cleverness." She tapped his chest lightly. "They will not forgive you here if they know. They will not forgive you there if you come without a use." "I know," Theon said. And still, for a breath she was a mirror, his own gray cast back with shadows he could not read. Then she shrugged and turned her face as if to the wind. "There is a Lyseni wine galley in port," she said conversationally. "In 3 nights it sails with a cargo of furs our men took and a belly full of cheap perfume. The sea can drown many things if you pour them into it, as can gold sometimes. You always like dice." Theon stared at her. The torch spat resin. The sound of the sea grew huge, then small again, as if a door opened in his ear and shut. "You would?" "I would do what amuses me," Asha said. "And it amuses me to see what you make of yourself when no man is leaning on your neck. If you stay, Father breaks you into something he can understand. If you go, you will break or harden in a way he will not name you by. Either way, I have my ships. But mark me," and there was that glint he had seen in her since childhood, the one that made men twice her size step careful. "If I am sent against the wolf shore, I will not come gentle." "I do," he said. She stepped aside, and the space she left was cold air and a long spiral down into stone. He went past her. When he reached the turn where he would have to look back if he wanted the sight of her one last time, he did not. The night stretched like tar between that hour and the Lyseni ships leaving. Theon moved through them, as if learning a new vertebrae in his spine for each hour. He had to keep upright. He did not hide, but he did not linger. He went where he was expected, gave the nods that meant a man knew his place, and liked it. He took the measure of guards, the timing of watches, the patterns of the longshoremen's curses. He slipped coin in packets with one hand, and with the other ran his fingers along hemp and oar and spar the way a man says farewell to a familiar room. On the second night, Aaron Damfair preached in the courtyard, and the rain came down like a consecration. Theon stood beneath it and tried to feel the drowning god's hand, and felt only the god of the riverlands in his blood. Brown and slow, and full of reed whispers. Aaron's beard hung like weed from a piling, What is dead may never die, the priest thundered, but rises harder and stronger. Men shouted it back. Theon heard a different response in his skull. What is dead may never die, but it may yet do harm to the living. He walked away before the chant turned to a hum that would cling to him all night. On the third night, he went to the Lyseni with a bundle of coin and a story about a girl in Lannisport. He would burn gifts, for if he did not find another life soon. The captain was a man whose hands trembled slightly even when nothing required them to. He liked stories. He liked coin more. He had a way of peering into men as if his eyes were the mouths of small fish, tasting. We sail on the turn, he said, pocketing Theon's future. When the tide goes out, it takes reputations with it, and returns with only driftwood. If your father asks, I will say you died of boredom. Theon wore a hood when he boarded, and did not look back. He told himself not looking was strength. He knew it was the only way he could keep his feet from turning him around. The sea, when he let it, could be a kind place. It is always a kindness to be shown what you are small against. The ship moved in a rhythm that found a rhythm in him. He slept in a hammock and dreamed of pine and then of towers, and then of nothing at all. Like someone who had washed himself clean at last, and did not yet know if there was anything beneath the grime. They hugged the coast, because Lyseni men were rich in perfume and poor in appetite for risk. They saw the green fire of the sea at night, and the clouds like torn banners by day. Theon kept count without knowing he was counting, and on the fourth morning gulls began to appear with a note in their voices that said, River. The sea tower at Seaguard rose like a finger wagging at the horizon, its bells not yet audible, its stones scored in his memory by tales he had learned at Winterfell, when the old men told of ash and screaming, and boys pushed from wall. They did not hide their approach. Theon had insisted upon it, with as much insistence as a paid passenger could claim. Let them see me come. Let them have archers ready. He stood at the prow when the sailors shouted their hello. When the bells began to peal, one then more, then a rolling, alarmed conversation across the water. He felt his ribs tighten, and knew part of him, remembered not only as a listener of tales, but as an iron-born son, what bells like those meant. Men running, women gathering children, by hair and arm, a lord buckling sword, shipmen readying their He raised both hands when the arrows lifted their black bead-headed eyes from the wall. He called out in a voice he made ring like iron. I am Theon Greyjoy of Pike, he shouted, and the sound made his throat raw, for it was not a name that bought welcome here. I come under a white flag to Lord Jason Mallister, with knowledge of raids about to be made on the north. Loose if you will. I can fall on this deck like a sack and make your day's story easier to tell. The archers kept him in their sights. Men on the wall shouted down. A smaller skiff came out after a long moment, oars neat as knitting. They brought him off the Lyseni ship as if he carried plague, with polearms near and their eyes never straying. Lord Jason Mallister had the kind of face that had practiced fairness until it learned to wear it like a helmet. He did not offer a smile or a blade. He kept his men close and his mouth tight as a purse when Theon was brought to him in a high chamber that smelled of oil and salt and polish. The hall's windows were cut to make the sea look like a painting framed there. Greyjoy, Jason said heavily. He said it not in welcome, but the way a man says the name of a wind he has learned to reef against. If this is a trick, it is a poor one. We do not forget your father's fires. Nemsa. If it is a trick, I will be first to burn, Theon said. He held his hands where the Lord could see them. He had been searched. They had enjoyed it. I've sent a raven ahead to King Robb. It will reach him whether or not you slit me. But if you slit me, you will lose what I know of where and when my father's ships will walk in shallow water, and where they will leave their boots. I have lived among wolves, Lord Mallister, and among krakens. I can tell you what each smells like. Jason looked at him long enough for the light in the window to change. It was a test of one sort. Theon knew it and met it. He had been met by worse. You may speak, Jason said at last, and I will listen. But you will do it in chains until I am persuaded that what you carry is not a stink. Theon nodded, and they put links on him. and he did not flinch at the rattle. He told them what he had written: the stony shore, the bait at Torrens Square, Asha's speed, and where she would strike to make a song of it, Victarion's slow grind, and what ports he would prefer, how Aeronon's drowned men would go where the gulls called loudest. He told them where the seabed was cruel near the cape, and where a clever lord with men who knew their reedcraft could bring down a longship with a few sunk stakes. He told them that in Deepwood Moat, the Glover men would die smiling if someone came to help them die less. At some point, while he spoke, Lord Jason leaned forward almost without knowing he had done it, because the line between enemy and instrument had thinned into something more like cord on which men blow to make fire grow. When Theon was done, the Lord was very quiet. He dismissed his men with a look. They went reluctantly, like dogs told to leave a bone. "If this is true," Jason said, "you have saved lives. If it is false, you will hang, and I will send pieces of you to Robb Stark and Balon Greyjoy both, and both will take that as proof of something about me and about you. I do not care what they think. I care what the sea brings to my shore and whether my bells ring because of what men choose." "It is true," Theon said. "It was as simple as water finding a slope." "Then I will send my ravens and my riders," Jason said, "and I will keep you until I have word from the king in the north. I owe him too much to play at margin with him." "No, you owe him your bell," Theon said, unable, even in the strangeness of the moment, to help the small curve of his mouth. "Greyjoys gave you that bell too, as I recall." Jason's mouth twitched, which on his face was as good as a grin. "We gave ourselves the bell. You gave us a reason to ring it." They put Theon in a tower room with a barred window, and a bed that could be slept in if a man forgot, and a guard who had once had a brother burned on a pyre the Ironmen made for merriment. The guard looked at him as if Theon's face contained the spark that leapt into straw. Theon slept anyway. Sleep is not loyalty or treachery. It comes to men who are empty enough. In the north, the raven found Robb in the dusk that makes men honest. He was in a low field outside the crag, where the grass was damp and the air had a brass edge. The camp smelled of horse and boiled barley, and the sweet rot of reed mats laid down under tent ropes. Robb had been walking, because walking made things less tight inside him. He loved command, and it ate him. He was young, and the war aged what it touched. Grey wind ranged and returned, and every time he returned, Robb's shoulders loosened, just a finger's width, and every time he went out, they were set again. Catelyn had not yet returned to him. His mother's absence was an ache behind his sternum. He had learned to carry it without cupping it with both hands like a hurt boy. When the raven came down black as a thrown stone, he took its stick legs in his grip and stroked it the way his father had shown him too many years ago. Firm enough to ground the creature, light enough to leave it. It was strange how a hand remembered the strokes that soothed the beast, when the heart forgot the softness that taught them. The message was sealed with a kraken. Robb's jaw had tightened so that a man near him had looked away. He broke the wax cleanly with his thumb. He read. He read again. The second time he felt not disbelief but a cold, careful sort of gratitude. Theon's hand he knew. How it made an R like a man who had learned it while laughing. His eyes rose. He saw the camp, not as his, but as a place that could be erased if the right piece of the board were knocked. The care he took then was less about the war than about the thing beneath, which was not banners and horses, but the web his men walked on that kept them standing as more than crows. "Galbart," he said, and Glover came, bearded and square, the memory of Deepwood Moat in his spine like a stick that kept him upright. "Mage. Send for me Sir Wendell Manderley's man and Sir Roderick's nephew." Quietly, quietly, they came. Robb spoke with the economy of a man who had learned that time moves even when a king orders it to hold. He did not show them the letter, but he told them the gist, and when Wendell's man's face flushed under the fat of it, and when Galbart's hands closed and opened like paws, and when Mage laugh cut the air and took blood from it, he saw how a letter from a longshore wind could stiffen a Northman's back. "We hold Winterfell," he said, and the way he said it was not cry but iron. "We do not chase raiders into traps. We do not leave boys exposed for pride. We call up White Harbor's ships for escort, not glory. Send riders to Torrens Square with orders to hold in the square even if the stables burn. Send to Lady Sabelle at Deepwood. She is to prepare to receive Mage and Galbart's men, and no others to drink her ale. If the Ironborn come, they will find axes set, and men who know their wood. He looked at the map on the plank laid over ale barrels. Those lines men use against the lies of distance. We cannot be everywhere. So we will be where it breaks them to find us. And Theon? Meg asked. There was no softness in it, but there was not only hardness either. What is he to us if he is not Ironborn? He is my friend, Robb said. And it surprised him that he could still say it without the word crumbling. And he is our tool in this. And he may be a Northman yet, if he is given cause. Send to Lord Jason, keep him and keep him safe. If Theon lies, it will be the last lie he tells. If he tells truth, he will have saved my brother's home. Robb did not sleep much that night. He walked again, into a rain that went through leather. Grey Wind came back streaked with mud, and lay with his head on Robb's boot. In his mind he saw Winterfell's walls and his little brother's face with the old hauntedness in it, and beyond that the great, heavy-eyed patience of their father. He saw Theon laughing across a table, a coin dancing on knuckles. He saw Theon's eyes when they had spoken before he sent him west, a quick, bright thing like a fish in a shallow that vanishes if you move. He let himself hope, but not like a boy. He let it in like a cup under a slow drip. Enough to wet the tongue, not enough to drown. At Winterfell, Bran dreamed of a wave rolling over a forest. He dreamed that the wave had a voice, and that it called his name in the old words that wolves know. He woke to Hodor's low muttering, and the smell of the banked fires in their pots. He sat with his legs forgotten below his waist, and listened to the rain on the castle like fingers beating a drum that had been stretched too tight. The ravens in the rookery muttered to themselves. One said, "Corn," in a tone of deep theological certainty. Another said, "Snow like a promise." A third said, "To the sea." To the sea. To the sea, as if remembering something no man in Winterfell had seen. Maester Luwin told him in the morning that ravens had come. 2, then 3 more before the 5th bell. The messages were the sort that made a maester's hands move like men putting out small fires in rooms where the beams are old. Lady Hornwood's men saw sails. The Umbers saw smoke from the stony shore. A rider from Barrowton had been turned back by men with axes who had salt in their hair and fish scales on their boots. Hodor carried Bran to the window slit, and Bran, who'd been trying very hard to be grown, let himself be small for one breath, and then put the smallness away, and wore the armor of lordling like a shirt grown into his skin. "Send for Sir Roderick," he said, and Luwin said he had been sent for already, and was already in the yard buckling old men into better mail than they had worn in their lives. Bran watched the yard like a boy at a play, and like a lord at a fort. Theon had told him once a story about a girl in a tower and a boy under it with a lute, and when Bran had laughed, Theon had laughed too, and said he told it wrong on purpose so the girl would listen. Bran thought of Theon now with an ache he did not have a word for. Missing and fearing had been joined in him like 2 saplings grafted into one crooked fruiting tree. At Seaguard, they did not know yet what had watched Winterfell in the night. They knew only that on the 2nd day after Theon's arrival, a group of longships had tested the twin reefs that guarded the mouth of the river. They came like insects on a stew, then darted away when the catapults spoke and the river stakes bit. On the 3rd day, a cleverer captain lingered long enough to watch the timing of the bell and send a boat crew into the shadow under the wall. But they found hooks instead of shadow and knives in the hands of men who had practiced the feel of rope under a different god's eye. They let Theon watch from the tower. They did not trust him with more than his eyes, but eyes can be tools too. He stood with Jason Mallister and the Lord's son, Patrick, who had an eager face and the lack of scars men mistake for invincibility. "They'll try again," Theon said, pointing to a spit of land that wore kelp like a cloak. "There's a channel there like a tongue. The sandbars shift. A captain who knows the taste of that place will come in on a gray tide to test if your men know it too." Jason glanced sidelong, then down at Theon's wrists, still bruised from iron. Do our men know it? Give them a man who has stood in water up to his waist in winter, Theon said, and smiled his thin smile. Give them a Northman who fishes in a thaw. The Ironborn love to pretend the sea is theirs alone. It is the lie that makes them brave. The truth is that the sea is no one's. The bell spoke, and then the sea spoke, and then men did. It was not a great battle. Great battles make a sound that reaches a mile and draws crows by instinct, and they hang a stink in the air that makes grass grow bitter. This was a quick, mean skirmish, with the waves doing more of the biting than the men. 2 longships grounded where the stakes had been set in the river mouth. A third turned like a startled pike and scraped her belly on sand enough to leave her limping. Men in leather shouted questions to gods and got answers from arrows. A grapnel took a Mallister man and pulled him into the water. Theon winced at the manner of it because he knew the weight of a wet man on a rope, how it pulled at a shoulder's tired hinge. He had done it, and been the weight in other seas. He was glad when the man came up again gasping, the grapnel having found only the meat of his surcoat. When it was done, and 3 boats burned, and one limped out looking back like a dog who has learned which houses throw stones. Lord Jason stood very still and let the silence after ring in his ear. You spoke true, he said finally. He did not add that truth does not cancel the other truths a man has on him. He did not have to. Days later, when the raven from Robb came, it carried the kind of words a young king writes when he hopes on purpose. Lord Jason read it twice. He came to Theon where the ward wore his chains like a belt he might not always need. King Robb says that your warning has fortified the north. Sir Roderick holds Winterfell. Mage Mormont and Galbart Glover make for Deepwood, with White Harbor's men hard on their heels. Torrens Square keeps its men behind stone and reinforces its walls, with dung as well as earth, because that keeps fire out better than pride. He says that if there is honor in you, it has not leaked out with the salt. He says he will not forget. Theon felt something loosen in him, not relief but a chords not being worked by patient fingers. He exhaled carefully. He also says, Jason added, and in him too there was the faintest note of amusement, that if you ever lie to him, he will take that as excuse to tie you to Grey Wind's leash for a day and let the wolf teach you what it is to be an honest dog. Fair, Theon said. His mouth did want to smile now, and he let it. Honest. Jason's gaze shifted a moment to the sea. I will release you from chains, Greyjoy, but I will not let you leave Seaguard until I have need of you. I may have need sooner than comfort would. Balon will not let this lie. I will use you against your blood until your blood forgets you, or remembers you too well, and comes to fetch you by fire. Do you understand? So, I do, Theon said. He rubbed his wrists where the skin was scabbed and new. I would rather be used by men who read letters than men who burned them. Jason nodded once, briskly, as if to a decision he had liked for a while but had waited to speak. Petrek, he called to his son, show Lord Theon where the seawall needs eyes willing to see tide more than legend, and fetch him a sword not sharpened to trickery. We are past that with him. Eddie. Patrick grinned like a boy sworn the first time to a man he likes. Theon followed him down into the guts of the keep, where the stone sweated and the sea made its own breath, steady as sleep. He thought, not for the first time, that this was not the life he had imagined at any of his ages. He had imagined himself sleek with conquest on pike, adored by men with dead eyes who would look like him, and so count for something. He had imagined himself beside Robb as the king his laughter always hid. He had imagined himself dead in glory, a shape legends harden around because no one is available to contradict them. Now he was a man who counted river stakes and taught other men where sandbars moved, and woke 3 times a night because he had dreamed of bells. It felt more like a shape a man could dwell in than any of the others. Sometimes the life a man inhabits is the one with doors that do not lock. It was not all river and rope. There were nights when the sea lay taut and quiet as if waiting for a hand to pluck it. On one such night, Asha's ships appeared, far enough to be dreams, close enough that anyone who had iron in them would taste it in their mouths. The moon whitened the water, bleaching it into bone milk. The sails were shadows moving across it. Theon knew her by how she came, cutting a line others missed. not out of cleverness, though she was clever, but out of a stubborn refusal to go where other men's fear marked thin water. She did not come to throw men with axes against the wall this night. She came, he understood, to look. He went up alone as high as the tower would let him, and stood with his palms on cool stone, and watched his sister watch him from a longship that had been his cradle more than any mossy bed. He lifted a hand. It felt foolish. It felt necessary. He could not tell if the small, dark figure that was Asha answered. Something glittered. A toy of light on wave. Perhaps only that. The ships slipped away as if the sea had unthought them. In Winterfell's Godswood, Bran sat with his back against rough bark and tried to hear something large and patient under the small business of leaves. He said his prayers as Luwin had taught him, and as his father had watched him say them once with a face like a place a storm goes around. He asked the old gods to make men he had never seen brave on shores he had never stood upon. He asked them to keep Theon from doing the bad thing that boys sometimes do when they are not looked at, though he was not sure now what the bad thing would be if you had already done so many possible others. He listened, and the gods, who seldom speak so that a boy can point to their words, spoke the way the wind does when it is holding its breath. In the Riverlands, men moved as if in a dance practiced badly, stepping on one another's toes, and sometimes on throats. Robb held his plan as if it were a lantern, not because light is a thing you ought to clutch, but because if you drop it, you set yourself on fire. He fought and won, and felt each win like a man who knows his victories are eating him. He trusted Theon because to do less would shrink him. He distrusted Theon because to do less would maim him. At Seaguard, the days began to string like orderly beads, which is where danger hides best. Theon drilled men who were not sailors in the things sailors know by skin, and he listened when those men told him the river's talk no Ironborn would hear. He let the river seep into him the way the sea had, not to replace it but to stand beside it. He began to sleep with one arm under his head and his face toward the window. He dreamed less of wolves and more of gulls. When the next raid came, it came as a lash, fast and cutting. Theon knew the hand that held it, not Asha. A captain who had learned small cruelty to make up for the lack of great genius. He expected fire. Theon had his men in the places that did not look like places at all. They took the raiders between wall and river like teeth. It was not clean. He saw a boy he had taught to feel the tide's pull make a kill, and then vomit, and then make another kill. He saw a Mallister oarsman go down with a knife in his neck, and the lantern he had held go into the water like a star setting. He saw one raider come across the gangplank light and fierce, and very young, hair wet to his skull, eyes bright with a god. Theon did not want to meet in a room alone. Heard him singing as his dirk moved, an old chant. Har, har, the wave takes all. Theon stepped in front of him. He knew every weight of that song. He parried. He disarmed the boy with something like pity and something like rage. He struck the boy on the temple with the flat of his blade and took him down hard. And when at last there were no more men to push into the gap, Theon bent and turned the young Ironborn over and looked at his face. He could have been himself 10 years ago. Seasick and hungry for something that tasted like a name you made your own by taking it. Theon let out a breath he had not known he was keeping. He called to the men nearest. "Bind him," he said. "He'll be worth a ransom if those who sired him can count past 2. The jest fell flat. But that was good. A jest that lands makes men go slack after it. When darkness came full, they sat with wounds and water and counted. Jason Mallister came beside Theon and stood an arm's length away, like men who have fought near one another and are deciding if they can fight nearer. "The king in the north asks for you," Jason said. "He thinks there is a use for you in the north again, if you will not sulk about the cold." "Winterfell," Theon said, the word so easy and so hard that his throat made a sound on it. He could see stone and lichen and the kitchen smoke. He could smell dogs. He could feel the weight of wolves' eyes like a blanket on his back. "He does not say Winterfell," Jason corrected, decent to the bone. "He says the north. He is careful, that boy. He is learning the places where words become ropes. But a man does not ask for you to come north if he wants you only in Barrowton. Will you go?" "Bam?" Theon looked at the river. In the moon, the current moved like muscle. He could almost hear a laugh in the sound of it, not mocking, but the kindly sort a man gives himself when he has made a choice and will have to live with it and knows it. "I will go," he said, "if the sea allows it, and if the land does not spit me out, and if the wolves will let me sit by their fire without checking the meat too often." Jason nodded, and for once did not hide his smile. If wolves check the meat, it is because they do not wish to go hungry. Better that than guests who eat you while praising your table. Man. They made ready. Theon sat alone once that night in the tower, and took out the ring he had sealed the first letter with. He turned it in his fingers until the metal warmed. He thought of his father's laugh and Asha's mouth and Aaron's eyes, and of Robb's young face older than it had any right to be, and of the way Maester Luwin's hands smelled of vellum and mint. He thought briefly, a prayer to gods he did not know how to placate. He did not ask them for forgiveness. He asked them for time. He asked them for a day laid after a day, the way stones laid after stones make walls. At dawn, the river wore mist like wool. Mallister's men put Theon aboard a sea-kindly galley that had seen more storms than he had idea for. Patrick clapped his shoulder and he bore it without flinch, though inside he was a tangle of wire. As the oars bit and the wind took the edge of the canvas, the bell of Seaguard spoke once, low and long, and not in alarm but in acknowledgement, like a note a lord takes when he has written a debt beside a name and means to pay it. The coast unrolled, the world turned, the gulls followed for the chance of fish guts and news. Theon stood with one hand on the rail where the pitch made his palm tacky, and he watched the north come closer, the way you watch a thing you have both loved and feared. He had chosen, and his choice would make him or unmake him. But in that morning cool, he felt something rise in him like a tide. "What is dead may never die," Asha's men sang, "but rises harder and stronger." He did not know if he had died, and if so, which part. He did not know what hardness and what strength would make of him. He thought only that sometimes loyalty was a blade you drew not at other men, but at your own past, and that it cut deep and very clean. There were watchfires on low headlands. There were homely smokes from fishermen's huts that would be gone if Ironmen came hungry. There were bursts of birds from marsh grass as the galley's shadow passed over their nests and made them think of hawks. Behind him, far out where the sea turns to the linemen tell themselves, is the end of their world. Sails, like black knives, pricked the sun. Asha's. Victorians. Another captain's entirely, naming himself to gods in a language that sounded like water-chewing bone? Theon could not tell. It did not matter. They would be there, and so would he. He set his face north, and the land breathed in, as if to see what came. Okay. The white knife took him as if it had been waiting all along, gray-green and thick with last year's leaves caught in its eddies. The banks raw, where men had cut clay to shore against spring's violence. Theon stood on the low foredeck of the Merman's Grace, and watched White Harbor lift itself from mist like a beast rolling in its sleep. The walls were clean stone in the rain, their lines deliberate. No show. All burden. Flags with the Merman blazon cod-colored in the wet. Fishmongers' cries lay flat over the water like planks. The reek of blubber and tar and river silt met him. Honest, concentrated, the kind of stink that says a place feeds its own. Wyman Manderley was not a man to hurry for any reason but hunger, and he was already eating when they brought Theon into the Merman's court. A pie that steamed fragrantly and bled dark when his knife went in. The hall's glass windows showed a gloom of rain and the ghost shapes of cranes. Theon bowed enough to answer the Lord's courtesy, and not enough to beg. He knew a certain kind of man counted bows like coins. "Greyjoy," Wyman said around a mouth already occupied. The word was not an insult. It was not a welcome either. "One hears that my roof keeps its own weather. We shall see." "Now, your lordship's roof keeps more than weather," Theon said. "It keeps ships and ears." He kept his hands visible. He did not touch the food they set near him. "You have a knack for flattery that leaves a man with no choice but to agree," Wyman said, and his small eyes flicked down to the seal on Robb's letter and up again. "The king in the north speaks well enough of you for now. He asks for you to be sent up the white knife, like a salmon. I am fond of salmon in many preparations." "Ben?" If I am to be a fish on a table, Theon said lightly, it might as well be in the north. That almost made the Lord of White Harbor smile. Almost. You will go upriver on the next tide. My bargemen will row as if their mother's bread lay on the oars. You will not find every door friendly on the way. The Hornwood men are a bit like thistles lately, and the White Knife is honest about where it runs shallow and where it chooses to be longer than any man thinks. I will send steel with you. If you are a trick, I will know it after the first bend, and then we can lay you out on the quay for the gulls. Nah. Theon inclined his head as if he had been offered a glass of good wine. If I am a trick, my lord, I am a poor one, for I warn men who might betray me first. Poor tricks are the kind men fall for, Wyman said, and snapped a crust with his thick fingers. But there are other signs. I judge men by what they smell of. He leaned, as if he had some trouble with breath, and inhaled as if Theon might be soup. You smell of salt and wet rope and stubbornness. Not all wrong for this business. He wiped his mouth, and the cloth came away stained. Go, then. If you bring me tales of wolves that are not there, I will make a pie from your lies and feed it to the harbor cats. The river held a different conversation with hulls than the sea. It tugged as if resentful, then soothed, then took hold again with unexpected fingers just under the surface. Their oars creaked in a discipline Theon found likable. Men doing one thing well, in rhythm. The banks rose and fell in slow sequence. Willow, alder, a crop of stones like broken teeth where the river had eaten and could not finish. Fishermen in leather hats watched from their drizzled world, inscrutable as cod. At bends where the bank opened to wet, low meadows, children in cloaks the color of old straw appeared as if grown there, stared without smiling, then ran along the ridge until the barge passed them, and stood panting, as if they could not bear to let a moving thing move without attendants. The bargemen called back gossip and warning in voices that made every bend feel like a village with a tongue. On the second day, men with rough axes and a banner faded to a horn shape in gray stopped them and wanted to know their names, and then wanted to know the same names again, as if hearing them twice made them more true. Hornwood men, prickling as Manderley had promised. Fear makes a winter coat inside a man and makes him sweat. They peered at Theon with the careful hatred of men who had been told all their lives where danger came from, and now saw it sitting in front of them politely. We go to Winterfell, the barge captain said, pointing with his chin to the parchment in his belt pouch, not taking his hands off the pole. By Lord Wyman's order? By the king's writ. The river runs that way whether you like it or not. He was a riverman to the bone. It gave him a lord's assurance without a lord's habit of explanation. One of the Hornwood men chewed his beard and spat into the drink. Then go. There's mail downriver and flames on the shore. I'd sooner you took your talk and your faces to where men like talk and faces. Men? Elwani. Theon sat still and let the captain take the barge on. He did not answer the jabe. He watched the Hornwood men watch him go, and thought how many small refusals and small allowances made up great betrayals and rescues, and how a man could drown in either as easily as in a real river. On the fourth dawn, the world congealed into fog, thick and white, tasting of fish and sour mud. The bargemen slowed to a muttering, and the polemen felt their way as men do in a lover's bed in middle age. Careful because they have learned how quickly a wrong reach makes a bruise that lasts. Theon could smell Winterfell the way a man remembers the smell of a woman's hair, even when she has put a hood on. The faint baked scent of stone that has been wet and then dry 1,000 times. Smoke that knows how to be useful, dogs. They saw the towers like old fingers, tips lost in the milk. The sound of the waterfall at the hot pools came before the sight, deep and steady, like a big animal sleeping. They tied up at the jetty as if they had been doing so every day for 20 years. Theon stood on wood he knew more intimately than some of the women he had claimed to know, and the name Winterfell moved in him like a fish in a weir. Sir Roderick Castle came in mail that had been polished hard enough to show smudged men in it, his whiskers fierce enough to frighten children into honesty. The old knight had a stiffness about his left shoulder that was worse than Theon remembered. Time and more than time had got into that joint. Beside him, Maester Lewin's chain clinked softly in time with his breath. The maester had a face like good bread left to go stale gently. He looked at Theon with a care that belonged to a man who had seen boys grow and break. They made no ceremony. The courtyard had too much to do for ceremony. Boys on the tower roof unrolled rawhide to keep rain from making a slick, and when they shouted, the shouted words were not for show, but to keep one another from stepping where a wrong step meant a broken ankle. Women in heavy skirts carried salt meats under oilcloth to the cellars. The smell of wet leather and boiled oats and men's wool cloaks thickened the air. Theon. Sir Roderick said, and his voice was heavy with warning, and with something else the old knight would never name where others might hear it. If you come under a white flag and with a clean purpose, we have need of all such. Theon bowed low to him, and did not bow at all to the memory in which he had once mocked the angle of the old man's back. I come to serve Winterfell, he said, and hearing himself say, it did a thing in his chest that made him feel both taller and newly born. Maester Luwin stepped closer than men who distrust a man's step. He put his hands on Theon's forearms and felt the hard of all the places oar and rope and sword had rubbed. You have ink under your nails, he said softly, surprising Theon. It is good to see a man who has sent a raven for something other than help to set a fire. Some fires do not need help, Theon said. They took him to Bran. Hodor bore the boy like a piece of precious wood in his great hands, easy and absolute, stepping as if the ground might shift beneath him. Bran sat straight in his saddle-like chair. He wore a lord's face that did not cancel how young he was. It lived on top of it, like a mask whittled too large for the boy beneath. His eyes were less a child's than they had been, more like a pool that has had large animals drink from it. Theon, he said, and his mouth made the name softly, as if it were a question and a remembering at once. Have you come home to us? I have come where I learned the names of the wind, Theon said. He went to one knee because it felt like the right thing, not to the Lord but to the boy he had thrown snowballs with, and taught dirty jests to. Your brother calls me friend yet. If you call me man, I will be content. Maester Luwin says we need men, Bran said. Hodor, set me down. Hodor did gently. Bran's small hands gripped the carved arm of his chair as if it were a ship's rail. Sir Roderick says we do not chase raiders. He says we make our walls against them, and then chase them when there are enough of us. He says a good wall is a sword you can stand behind. He is right, Theon said. The Ironborn would like nothing better than to be the man who lured Sir Roderick out and took Winterfell while the walls grew lonely and sang to themselves for company. They make songs of those tricks, best to leave them hungry of such. Bran looked lower then, at Theon's boots, as if they might tell him more truth than faces do. Osha says the sea's men smell like kelp even when they are dry. You do a little. I won't wash for 3 days to please her, Theon said, and Bran's mouth twitched painfully toward a grin. They set him to work like any man who came with sharpness. Under watch, under doubt, under necessity. Sir Roderick had a map rolled on his board, weighted by a smith's hammer, and a carved hound. His old finger traced new reports. Smoke on the stony shore, a taken hamlet and the boatmen gone. Torhen Square with men on its wall, who laughed at small parties of raiders, but would not laugh at a captain bold enough to test them with fire at night. The little carved trees that showed the forest were worn smooth by generations of anxious thumbs. Eager men will take bait if you make it smell like the stew their mother made, Theon said. We will not be eager men for a while. He leaned over the board, his smell of river and rain and tar making a small weather of its own. Have the Manderley riverboats sit their bellies low with stones and timber, then carry boys and old men with bows on them in leather and mud. Asha will not come for Torhen Square like a hammer. She will skip off the face of it and look for weakness elsewhere. She will like the sound of the stony shore more. Men go slack when they hear only their own gulls. In those coves, put stakes in a rude horseshoe just under the waterline. Leave one place apparently clean. When their lead ship takes the clean lane, it finds itself in a cup and cannot backwater. Then light tarred reed rafts and push them slowly. He saw the men around him shape their mouths around the word and the image both. Slow scares them more than fast, Fast can be dodged. Slow says someone thought about you. Sir Roderick's eyebrow walked up his scarred brow. You would set fire on the stony shore. You know the wind better than I, perhaps. I know what we can lose when fire leaps. I know it, Theon said evenly. No man who grew where I did forgets what a bad gust does. But a little fire, managed, will keep them from bringing more. Bell. White Harbor sent 3 low galleys up to Barrowton yesterday, Lewin said. Lord Wyman wrote it in his careful hand with gravy on the edge of the page. He smiled a little despite himself. They can row to those coves once the sticks are set. If the wind betrays us, oars will not. Sir Roderick stared at the map until the hound and the hammer looked like strange gods. We will do it, he said at last. And I will keep here a belly of men, and I will not ride to Torrens Square if they bait. They will learn that the old dog has dug himself into the dirt by the door. Now. And Bran's wolves, no, Robb's wolves, Ned's wolves, were not the only ones who came to Winterfell that week. Jojen Reed and Mira slipped from the edge of the world like people the forest had assembled, twig by twig. They came muddy and calm, and the servants disliked them because new people were work, and because Mira carried a frog spear as if it had hung at her belt since birth. Jojen had eyes the color the swamp takes into itself and holds, and they looked at Theon with decent curiosity and more. Your feet remember boats, Jojen said as if reporting weather. My feet remember many things, Theon said. They forget as well. Ours remember water that stands, Jojen said. Standing water remembers other things, and it tells them if you listen. He had a soft voice that made people lean in, or else walk away because they disliked leaning. At night, that tasted of iron in the air. Theon went to the God's Wood, and the heart tree looked the way it always did, which was like a thing pretending very badly to be asleep. It had watched too many men to be fooled by the particularities of anyone. The red leaves had the wet gloss that makes a man think of tongues. He was not a praying man, but he stood and allowed that there are places where men speak lower for reasons older than courtesy. Osha was there, the leather of her clothes a darker shadow in the dark. She looked at him without moving. You carry 2 seas in you, she said, matter of fact. They slap against each other and make a chop. I carry a river now too, Theon said. Rivers remember where they are going, Osha said, and snorted. Men are less steady. He thought of answering in a way that would make a snarl into wit, but chose instead to stand next to her a little, smelling the damp, letting the silence roll over them both, thinking perhaps gods loved quiet when men gave it to them on purpose. Word came before dawn the next day that Ironmen were landing in coves, where children gathered mussels in the spring. Sir Roderick did not raise the castle in a frenzy. Frenzy makes a stew of men that pours badly. He put lightly armored bowmen on ponies. He sent the White Harbor galleys downriver with the first light shaking out in their wake. He let Theon go with the rivermen to show them where the water won to fool strangers. Take a dozen, Sir Roderick said, very mild as he settled a gorget at his throat. If you do not come back, try to send more than a story. They pushed reed rafts black with tar with poles and soft curses, the smell of pitch and wet woven stuff, a rope up their noses. The sea met the white knife and made a child of it for a moment, slapping and shouldering. Then they were in the further, gentler hands of the quiet coves with their stones like teeth, just where a man's eye did not go. The stakes did what stakes do when a man has set them thinking of another man's boat. The lead longship came in with the confidence of a cat that has always found its windowsill unguarded, and found itself suddenly in a pudding of choices where all the choices were bad. The fire went out on the rafts for a moment. When the first small waves licked too eager, then found themselves again as the oarsmen pushed them unromantically forward. Asha was not among these raiders. Theon knew it by how they shouted when surprised. Too many voices rising together. His own men did not cheer when the longship caught behind her twine and could not backwater. Cheering is for men who will not have to do another hard thing in 10 heartbeat. They drove the fire where they must, not close enough to leap, close enough to make men on the deck think about the manner of their dying more than the next cut. Archers on the rocks dropped men who chose badly between leaping and staying. The sea swallowed and returned pieces with its usual calm. A second longship, more careful, backed her oars and slipped away with proper shame. A third scraped her belly enough to remind her captain that the river had been here before his mother's mother, and did not care. Dagmar Cleftjaw came, because of course he did, a day later, like a note in an old song you had forgotten but always knew would come. He came with a single lean ship, and a sail patched as carefully as a widow's skirt. He put his men out in boats, and they came quietly. A thing Ironborn did not like but did when the water told them it would accept nothing else. Theon stood on a low spit that kept its secrets under eelgrass. He did not hide his face. "Whelp," Dagmar said, from 6 oar lengths away, softly and without malice, as if announcing a weather change. The cleft in his jaw ran like someone had tried to split a log and misjudged, and he wore it at ease. "The stories say you are writing letters now with your hands, not with your father's blade." "The stories are true," Theon said. The water lapped. The fire rafts peeped where they had burned down to sullen. "I serve Robb Stark." Dagmar's men shifted oars, made the little snick noise good oars make when agreeing with one another. Dagmar himself only looked. Serve is a good word in a bad mouth. "It will cut you, boy. Men here will hang you if it pleases them, and men there will clap your back until it bruises, and then forget you ever had a back. And now, you taught me to hit where it matters and not where it pleases," Theon said. His heart was calm. The sea does that sometimes for a man. "This matters. Go back. Tell Asha if she is wise the stony shore will cost her and give little. She taught me as much with her black face and her grin when I was too small to see over the gunwale." Dagmar watched the reeds bend where a fish moved. "Asha will do as Asha does." He chuckled faintly. "She always knew yourself better than you did, boy, and it made her fond of you as a man is fond of a song one cannot dance to. I will tell her what I have seen. Stakes like teeth, fire that creeps like a lazy cat, boys with bows who are not too proud to run after they shoot. Your work, it is neat." "I learned neatness in places you would call soft," Theon said. "There are no soft places," Dagmar said, and tapped his men to back water with a move of his fingers that would have been a benediction if he had holy oil in him. "Only hard men who lie to themselves. Well then, grow hard however you like, Theon." "Damn." He went, leaving Theon with the smell of wet ash and the sound of a boy weeping because the cut he had taken did not seem like it ought to hurt so much and did. Theon bound the boy's forearm with a strip of cloth and did not tell him that he liked him for crying. He did not say what he recognized. There is dignity in saying nothing sometimes. It lets men keep a peace they might sell for laughter. They came back to Winterfell with smoke on them, and with small wounds that would scar if they let them. The yard welcomed them like a loom. Men slotting into the places they had left, women turning to take packs as though catching a shuttle. Maester Luwin dabbed at a burn on Theon's wrist, with something that smelled of rosemary and old war. "You plan like a man who knows what foolishness men are capable of," he said. "I plan like a man who has led men with oars," Theon said. "Oars make honest thoughts. You move when the stroke comes, you all breathe in the same harsh way, you do not pretend the water will become less if you wish." Luwin said, which in him could cover praise or caution. "Lord Bran heard your men sing on the walls. He liked the tune poorly, but the words were about Winterfell standing, and that matters to a boy who must stand in place. Bran wished to hear everything in a lord's measured sequence when they brought him news." Theon told him, with quiet where it was needed, and the small clipped movements of his hand when mapping where his words went. Mira Reed sat on the flagstones and sharpened a frog spear with her thumb, as if she had been born a whetstone. Jojen watched Theon with grave, bright intent. "You have turned a tide," Jojen said, half to himself when Theon had done. "Tides turn whether men will it or not, but sometimes they are helped. You are salt drawn inland. Is that good?" Bran asked, impatient with green words when meat words were at hand. "It is different," Jojen said. "Difference is a tool." Life in Winterfell unrolled in a sequence both familiar and newly taught. Theon found places that had been boy places in him, and discovered they would still hold his weight, if he was patient. The kitchen's windows fogged with soup and porridge. The dogs held arguments that made more sense than some men's counsels. then fell asleep with a complete lack of apology. Hodor carried Bran with tenderness that would have made a gentler man weep. Old Nan's stories had left their long cobwebs everywhere, even after the old woman's voice was gone. Girls in the laundry spoke of them as if the tales were part of the work they did with their hands. Not all news came with rivermen. At the Hornwood, men were cutting trees for palisade, and finding axes in the night where no men had been to lay them down. There were hoofprints and no horses. There were sheep killed, and not for meat, but for rage. The name that hung in men's mouths and would not be spat was Ramsay Snow. Sir Roderick grew another line beside his mouth when he heard the third such report. "Bolton's bastard thinks the world is a board for foxes," he said carefully, as one speaks near a child. "I will go and set dogs on him." "He wants you to come," Theon said without heat. "He wants you away from these walls." "And I want him to die," Sir Roderick said. "We do not always get what we want, but sometimes we go and ask." They compromised with caution. Sir Roderick took men enough to set a trap, but left a spine at Winterfell that would not bend. Theon asked to ride with the old knight and was refused, then asked again and was allowed because he did not wheedle in the second asking. He thought, this is what loyalty feels like in the ribs, not just in poems. It is not a warm thing. It is a restraint you choose. He put on his mail over a quilted jacket that had been made in this castle, by hands he could name. They rode under skies like iron, and through birch stands that looked as if someone had arranged them for the eye to be pleased. The Hornwood kept its secrets well. It is what woods do where men live thin. They slept one night in a crofter's house where the thatch let rain through in a polite drizzle, and the woman of the house made oatcakes the size of shields, and burned them with an expertise that suggested art. Sir Roderick snored like a landslide. Theon lay awake and listened to the old knight's breath, and thought of men who had breathed like that, and then not at all. He thought of Balon Greyjoy and the laugh that had cut him in Pike's Hall, and of Asha's mouth, and of Dagmer's calm. He thought of Robb, who slept these days like a man lying down with work. They found Ramsay the way a man finds a bad tooth with his tongue, because it hurts in a particular way. One of the Hornwood men had been bribed to leave a back gate unbarred to a sheepfold. The flock had been killed by men who had enjoyed it. The blood and the straw smelled like pennies and old breath. Tracks that wanted to be read wrong curved to a brook where men had knelt to drink. Sir Roderick let himself be angry long enough to smell like anger, then set it aside. He put men where the trees shadowed the path in the hour before dusk, and when Ramsay's small party came, riding light and dirty and sure of themselves, Sir Roderick closed the wooden jaws gently, not too quick. A trap that says, "There, there." The bastard of Bolton was not a large man, but men like him do not require size to fill the space their shadows want. He wore dark leather too fine for a reaver, and carried himself very straight. Beside him rode a thin man in stinking rags with hair like wet straw. Shaw. The thin man kept his eyes on the ground, a servant who had learned to be small in the hardest ways. Theon knew him at once. Not the man. The manner. He knew the inversion. The one who looked like a servant was the dangerous one if you touched what was beneath. He rode closer than was wise, and let the wet of the wood and the smell of horse sweat and old rot do their work. "Sir Roderick Castle," Ramsay said pleasantly when the horn sounded, and men stepped into the path without asking more of the trees than the trees were happy to give. "A pleasure to breathe where you do. I've heard you are a fair man. Fair men and I do not understand one another, but we can get along if there is profit. You are outlawed in the Hornwood," Sir Roderick said. "Surrender your arms. You will be judged." "Judgment is a trick men use when they want to be the knife but pretend the sky is cutting you," Ramsay said, smiling a little, as if wizened at a private comedy. His smile sat wrong. Men's smiles tell the truth, though their words walk in circles. "I am here to collect a wife." Lord Hornwood died without making certain arrangements. "I am a man who likes arrangements." "You like flaying," one of the Hornwood men said from the trees, his voice shaking with an old story and a new fear. "You like leaving fingers where children find them." Ramsay's eyes flicked, quick, not to the voice, but to the shadow where it lay. He had hunter's instincts ruined by cruelty's impatience. "I like many things. I will like this less than most." His horse sidled as if anticipating the man's smell. "Reek," he said to the thin man without looking at him. "Tell them who you are." "I am Reek," said the thin man, in a voice that tried to be humble, and remembered another room. "I am Reek. I smell." "Reek is a loyal creature," Ramsay said. "Dogs are loyal. Men less. Throw down your weapons," Sir Roderick said again. "Steady," and to Theon's surprise Ramsay did. He tossed his sword lightly to the ground, dismounted slowly with the grace of a man who wants to show he can if he chooses not to. He let himself be bound as if trying on a coat in a shop he might not buy from. His men did not follow his example enthusiastically, but they looked at the wood's shadows and decided their lives mattered. They took them back in a long, serious chain among trees that did not care. Back in Winterfell, they put Ramsay in a cell where the straw had been changed yesterday, and the walls were dry, and the bar fitting creaked only a little. They put Reek in a different cell, and Theon asked that the two be far apart. Sir Roderick raised one eyebrow, and Lewin looked at Theon over his fingers. "He is not what he wants you to think he is," Theon said, when the door had latched. "Servants learn to hold themselves different. This one holds himself like a man who expects men to move aside for him." "Ramsay Theonason now?" Sir Roderick asked dryly. "Because it would be comical if it were not so rotten." "Let us not be fools," Theon said. He stood at the cell and looked in at Reek. The man would not meet his eye. "Let him rot where he is with jailers who have dogs and a quiet turn of key, and do not say his name. Do not let him hear it. He will make a knife of any name you give him." "And now," Lewin rubbed his lip. "Words are air given shape," he murmured. "Sometimes they cut. Sometimes they warm." He nodded slowly. "We will keep him as Theon says. There is nothing in caution that harms us but our pride." Ramsay smiled in his own dark nest when they told him they would hold him for judgment. "I love judgment," he said. "I love men who think it is a blade. Did you know that if you peel a man in neat strips and salt them, he will last a very long time and speak to you of truth? It is a kind of priesthood." "Oh." Sir Roderick's hands flexed, then stilled. "You will not be peeled," he said. "You will be weighed. Perhaps that frightens you. It ought." With Ramsay in a cell that did not echo his name, and his thin shadow man eating porridge in the dark quietly, the hornwood went a little less sour. That kind of sour is slow to go. It is in the ground and the wells both. But a change ran through the messages that came to Winterfell. Ewes killed now by wolves, as ewes have always been killed when the year turns. Not by men who practice on animals what they mean to do to people. What Theon had done. At the coves rippled. Ironborn raiders came more careful, which meant less effective, which meant less dead. Theon stood on Winterfell's wall in rain that made the stones leach their long-held moss smell, and counted the small ways in which a place saves itself that no song recounts. A boy who watches an extra hour without picking his nose when he is bored. A smith who decides this time he will grind the edge another 15 strokes. A cook who waters the beer less because men fight better when their food tastes of some. He found in himself a quiet like the kind the river makes after excitement, when the current goes back to being a slow muscle under everything. Not that news from the south let anyone grow fine with comfort. Ravens brought word with Lannister wax that stank of arrogance even through parchment. Lord Karstark had killed boys in wrath and been judged for it by the boy he had called king in a hurt country voice. Robb had married a Westerling girl, because men do not always make the right choices when they are bleeding, and a woman touches the blood gently. Sir Wendell Manderly, who laughed too loudly and ate like a conquest, wrote to say he was going to the Twins and would eat old bread there cheerfully for the sake of a treaty. He drew a pie in the margin, because Wendell drew pies in margins. The ink sank into the page so heavily the parchment wrinkled. When the letter was read in the hall, men murmured about the phrase, the way peasants murmur about a weather witch. Part scoff, part fear that the scoff ails the crops. Theon kept his mouth as a line. He had seen men change faces in a blink. He had written letters and watched their wings. He understood too well how thin the ice is beneath a march that looks solid from the shore. Asha came ashore once. Theon knew because the boat that carried her was rowed evenly and without pride. And because the men in it looked at her more than they looked at the land they were risking themselves on. She chose a cold morning with low sky and a smell of snow not yet visible. She made a camp on the stony shore with a discipline that would have made an old sergeant blink, and then she came up to where men could see her and said what she meant to say, where stones would remember. Theon rode with 6. No more. Too many men made a fight out of a talk without meaning to. They met where the land squeezed up and the wind liked to rest its elbows. Asha wore sealskin and leather that had been mended in 3 different patterns, neat and without shame. Her hair had kelp in it, in a joke a storm had played. She looked at Theon and laughed once. Short and sweet like the old days, when she had taken his dice and given him a hard clap for thinking himself clever. "You have become a Northman," she said badly. "Look at you. Your horse is not your father's horse. Your cloak is too thick. Your eyes ask for trees." "I have learned to wear what keeps me warm," Theon said. "A man who refuses a cloak because he remembers a different wind dies even if he remains stiff in his pride. Who taught you to talk like that? Stark men with books? Some maester with a chain who thinks himself a priest of words?" Asha made a face as if someone had offered her honey with a fly drowned in it. "We speak plainer on the sea. We speak plainer when we can afford it," Theon said. He took off his glove and put his hand out, then thought better and put it on his horse's neck. "Go home, Asha. Tell father the north is awake. Tell him the reeds whisper in the neck and the Manderley's oars knock in time with the mountain men's boots. Tell him the places he thinks are asleep have sat up and rubbed their eyes and are reaching for their axes." "My father thinks himself a wave," Asha said. "Waves do not listen. They break or they do not. You listen," Theon said. "I listen because I am not a wave," she said cheerfully. "I am a woman with a ship and men who love it when my enemies think I am a wave. You hurt 2 of my captains this fortnight. One will breathe like a bellows for the rest of his short days. I do not forgive such kindly. I came to see if you would flinch when I said that." "Did I?" Theon asked. "No," she admitted. "And I hate that you did not. I'm half of a mind to call you traitor so we can live in a story that is easy to tell. The other half likes to see you stand. I always did like to see boys who were too soft in the face decide to be something harder than men who mock them." She tilted her head. "Will you come back to us when the wolf turns on you?" "He has not," Theon said, very even. "He will," she said, even too. "That is what kings do when they learn what they are. They turn. If you take my hand now, I will call you brother for as long as we both float." "I will not," Theon said. It was almost kind, the way he said it. He did not like himself for that. He wanted to hate. Hate made things simple, and the world had not been simple since he was 10. "I will see you again." She laughed again, a cut of sound. "On water or under it," she said, and went back to her camp with her shoulders alert and easy at once. Winterfell ate men's days as it always had, and the days had a different taste now. Iron where there had been wood smoke alone. Theon walked its walls so often he could have walked them in sleep. He knew where the mortar had loosened in a never-fixed way that does not betray a wall, but gives it character. He knew where a tower's draft attacked the candles longest. He learned the names of a dozen boys whose names no one far from this place ever would care for. Cregan with a left eye always running when the wind turned. Lonel who could coax a spark from damp tinder with a patience holy men would have admired. Donal named after a father who had not come back from the Trident. He let them tell him their small brags, and he offered none of his own. He spent time with Ramsay's gaolers on purpose. It is not enough to order a thing. It must be held to. He brought them sausages from the kitchen wrapped in cloth, and did not try to bribe them, because men can smell bribes on the air and it sours their work. He listened without asking, and the jailers told him about which keys stuck, in which locks, and how sometimes a mouse got trapped in the bucket, and how a man sings different through a barred door when he thinks the man listening is soft. Once at night, he went alone to the corridor outside Ramsay's cell and stood very still. The Bastard of Bolton was humming. The sound rose and fell like a lullaby taught by a mother who always meant to drop the child. Theon stood a long time and felt something old in him gnaw gently at the rope he had wrapped it in. He went to see Reek as well. The man in the far cell had taken to eating with both hands like a child, more to fill his mouth with one thing than because he had forgotten how to hold a spoon. Osha came with Theon once, at his request. She stood with her arms folded and sniffed and made a face that did not exaggerate. "He smells of fear," she said, "and of pride made to curl up and hide. That one knows too much about which side of a door a man ought to be on. Keep him under stone, Kraken boy. If he sees Sky again, someone else will not." News from Deepwood came with a white harbor rider whose horse's breath smoked so heavily it looked like he dragged a ghost behind him. Lady Glover had withstood 3 tries at her gate and was rationing flour herself with a knife that made portions honest. Meg Mormont and Galbart Glover had broken the first ring the Ironborn tried to set around the motte and were going to break the second by bringing men through a stand of black pine where even the trees disliked the company of axes. The Ironborn had put a boy in a tree by his belt as a mockery. The boy lived because Lady Glover had cut him down herself with a mallet, and did not scold him for weeping but for letting his tears freeze on his face and make his skin crack. Theon felt pride so sharp at that tale it might have been shame turned inside out. He had grown up bound to both worlds, and at this late hour, it pleased him that the one he had chosen could be as cruel as he needed and as kind as he wanted. Men do not get such luck often. A snow came and stayed, not heavy, but enough to remind men that even in raiding times, the sky still thinks itself the chief. The yard changed its sound. Boots bit. Laughter became steam. Theon found the rhythm of this too. How a man walks strategic on snow if he means to live long. How a woman's cloak will carry shape and weight enough to knock a child down if he runs wrong. How dogs turn foolish in soft weather and lie on their backs as if begging the sky to scratch them. He dreamed once, in a light doze before dawn when men's minds go worse places, that he walked halls full of smoke and men, with bells sewn into their hair, beat drums with flayed skins, and his fingers were bones with no flesh. He woke with his hands numb and found Bran looking at him solemn from his chair, by the fire, in the small solar. "Jojen says some dreams are true," Bran said. "He says some are only dreams. Some true things feel like dreams when you try to put them into a day," Theon said. "Jojen says." Bran started again, and then Jojen himself came from the corner where Theon had not seen him, because boys who live in swamps have a way with corners. "I say you walk with 2 shadows," Jojen said. "One belongs to a child who wanted to be a man. One belongs to a man who is afraid he is only a child. They will not always fight if you give them both tasks." "And what tasks?" Theon asked, irritated at the boy's calm, because he recognized it, and because the quiet in him felt like mockery when he had slept badly. "Protect," Jojen said simply. "Hurt where you must. Carry names carefully. When you are asked to set down one, do not set it on rotten wood. Do not go south unless you must." He blinked very slowly. "South is a place for stabbing men with stories." Theon laughed despite himself. "Everything is. Not Winterfell," Jojen said. "Winterfell is a place for holding stories while you do work." He said nothing more. Theon sat with the boy, and the other boy, and let the fire convince his hands to be his again. When the ravens came together 2 days after that, one bore Lord Jason's hand, and said that Seagard would be hit again soon, and would hold again, and that Patrick had learned to count to 10 before shouting, and had killed a man he would have missed, which is a change from the other way round. The other bore Robb's hand, and asked for Theon in words that did not try to sound like a command. "If he will come, I will have use for him that the North can spare him for, and perhaps he can help me with men who called me nephew once." That last sat on the page with a weight of hope a boy would not see. The phrase did not write their words on it. You could see their shape anyway. Sir Roderick read the letter out to Theon in a voice like a worn saw that cuts true. "He needs you to stand and speak," the old knight said. "He needs you to be what you are now and also what you were then. I do not like it. Men who need 2 men in 1 man seldom like what they get. But I will not deny your king his friend or his tool." "Then see." Maester Luwin sighed with his breath and not with his chest. "If you go, you must go with eyes without love in them," he said. "Love is a good thing. It blinds. He touched Theon's wrist. The burn there had healed to a line the color of old tallow. If you do not go, you must be content to be what Winterfell asks, and not think south thoughts when the snow is at your ankles. Bran looked at Theon with sudden ferocity that had nothing of child. You must come back, he said. If you go, you must come back. That is the task I give you. I do not know if men can promise such, Theon said, and hated that his throat chose that moment to be a stranger. You can, Bran said. Say it. Theon looked at him and thought of all the promises men had made him, and he them, and how many had been broken by trickery, and how many by what the world is. He made a fist and laid it lightly on the boy's chair, burned smooth by years of hands. I will come back, he said. The words did a thing in him far more frightening than any oath to a king. If I live, I will come back. Bran nodded, as if he had moved a piece on a board that made better music now. They readied him as if for winter hunting. The Manderley bargeman would carry him down the White Knife. From there, the road would take him and men with him toward the Trident, toward the twins' low ugly towers and the wet smell of the green fort. Sir Roderick gave him 10 men he could trust, and told him their names. He did not say what each was best at, because men hear praise and hear only a chance to prove it, and so sometimes prove it badly. Osha brought him a bundle of dried meat and hard cheese, and 3 onions and a curse, which was the careful kind of love she knew how to give. In the jail, Ramsay smiled when Theon came to look at him one last time. Will you take me for ransom? He inquired almost sweetly. I am worth much if you measure worth in men's screams. Theon stood and did not touch the bars, and thought how many bars a man makes for himself, and then forgets to walk out of when the door is left open. You will be judged in winter, he said. It is a good season for truth. It makes everything stiff. I make things soft, Ramsay said, and laughed quietly, gently, as if this were a kindness he offered men. Safe roads to you, Kraken boy. There are knives where you go that you cannot see. They cut the pieces you think are not your flesh. Theon left him. He went to the God's Wood one last time, and told the Red Leaves nothing, because men who are learning to be honest sometimes know when to keep their words inside their mouths until they taste right. He put his palm on the weirwood's bark and felt it cool and slightly damp, as if it had been breathing slower than men all day and grown bored with their haste. He thought of the sea and of the river and of the boy he had been, swinging his legs under tables and making girls laugh for a dare, and of the man he now tried to be, working his mind around other men's tricks until he could smell where they had hid the bait. Snow worried at the air. When he walked to the gate, the men on the wall called down their rude farewells and their careful prayers. Bran raised a hand, and Theon raised his in answer, and felt how small he was in the yard, and how large. Hodor boomed a sound that carried after them down to the river like a bell rung under fur. The White Knife received them again without ceremony. The oars cut their paths. The bank slipped away, reversed now, so the birches that had escorted him toward home escorted him toward the world. He kept his cloak tight and his mouth looser than it had been for months, and told the bargeman a story about a Lysani who shaved only the parts of his beard that offended priests, and the men laughed the way river men do when a story knows where it is going. At a bend where the water slowed and widened, they saw a funeral boat slide out from a small hamlet, a girl's hair stiff with rime, a man's face bare to the gray. Men lifted their oars in silence, because that is what is done. Theon felt the cords of the world then, not as ropes to bind, but as lines men hold each other by whether they wish or not. They came to White Harbor under a sky pretending at brightness, and Theon smelled the city's fats and fish with something like affection. Wyman Manderley had a new pie and new tidings, and the old interest in Theon's face, when it had shaped new resolve. He ate with the fat lord because it would have been rude not to, and because watching a man eat with absolute joy reminds you there are parts of life that make sense wherever you stand. You will pass the twins, Wyman said, as if this were news a man might forget, and dabbed at his lip. Walder Frey likes to think a bridge makes a boy a king. Be very polite to his bridge and not too polite to his boys. There is a way men can smell when a man despises them politely, and they like it less than if you struck them. He bent, his small eyes intent. There is a difference between fat and soft, Theon Greyjoy. Do not mistake men who look one for being the other. I am fat. I do not soften. I do not mistake you, Theon said, and meant it. He set out with 10 and a sledge of provisions, and a dozen quiet fears that made no noise when he checked them, like a man in the night, laying his hands on the tips of his knives. The road kept its secrets well, but men on it did not. They had stories like blisters. They spoke them whether Theon asked or not, of Lord Karstark's sad rage, of the way a boy king looked when he signed to death, not young and not old, and something that made men respect and pity at once, of the Frees who counted beans slower than they counted oaths, and sometimes counted both too loudly. And there were other rumors, like seeds blown out of season, that lodged in a man's ear whether he wanted them or no, of men in the far north whose eyes blue as certain winter skies did not blink, of dead on their feet, of wind that carried voices it had picked up from parted mouths and kept to itself for a long time. Theon did not believe such things, and did not disbelieve them. He tucked them away the way a man tucks a flint into his pouch and forgets it until he needs fire. They crossed the barrows rolling low as an old man's shoulders under a cloak. They camped in copses where the wind was gentler and where the trees looked at them with the resignation of things too old to move aside. Theon dreamed one night of Asha walking on an ice that did not break, and of Dagmar's jaw scar filling with snow, and it warming there. Impossible and right. On the 10th day, the towers of the twins hove up like a promise men had died of, squat and unfriendly, with crows telling one another their business on the battlements. The river moved too slow under them, as if sulking. The bridge was a back bent too long. The Frey's banner hung limp and wet, as if it had been flayed and left to dry badly. Theon felt his mouth thin at the corners. He thought of Robb's letter, soft in its request and hard in what it asked him to stand for. He thought of boys with mismatched eyes and old men with too many daughters, and of songs that put virtue into the mouths of men who had none and stole it from men who did. "Remember, boys," he said softly to the men at his back, "we are not here to make mothers cry or to make ugly men feel prettier than they are. We are here to walk across a bridge without being pushed into the water. Keep your hands where those with counting sticks can see them. Smile when it hurts. Let me do the talking. If my talking fails, do not fail to draw." And he went forward, his shoulders remembering both oar and sword and bow, his tongue tasting of river iron and old fights. He thought of Winterfell's walls, as if they could steady him from here. He thought of Bran's face when he had made a promise that felt like a leash tied to his own heart. On the parapet above, Walder Frey's sons watched with their noses. Men with noses like that smell weakness and joy with equal attention. Theon lifted his hand and made it a sign of politeness, not of begging. He was a Greyjoy who had chosen to be a Stark's man. He would not pretend to be less or more. He fixed his eyes not on the fretted stones, nor on the men who had shaped themselves into sneers over decades of leisure, but on the middle distance, as a sailor does when he wishes to keep a straight course while the shore calls. Somewhere behind him in memory, he heard Asha laugh, and Robb's voice in a game turn into a command, and Maester Luwin cough softly into his sleeve to warn a boy to be better. Somewhere ahead, he heard a word in a slender, dry old man's voice that would open a gate or close it, that would invite him to bread or to blood. He was a man filled with 2 seas and a river, and a promise that pulled at him like a tide. He set his foot on the first stone of the bridge, as if it belonged as much to him as to the men who had taken coin from a king to build it. The wind came up river sour and full of long miles. He went forward with his mouth composed, and his hand near his hilt, and his head at just the right incline to show a lordling he understood pride, and not enough to tell a butcher he would taste meekness. Behind him, the men breathed in time without meaning to. In him, 2 waters met and made a chop, and he learned, at last, how to ride it without breaking.